Vertical Farming Podcast, episode 157. Regular listeners to the show, welcome back. Thank you so much for everything you do to support the show, whether it's your second show or your 157th. I appreciate everything you do to support this podcast over the years, and I hope you continue to do so. If this is your first time listening, I'm positive you're in the right place, as this is the podcast where I interview fascinating CEOs and founders of the leading vertical farming companies from around the world. I'm your host, Harry Duran, podcasting since 2014 with my first show, Podcast Junkies, which is now celebrating its 11th year, and also the co-founder of the AgTech Media Group. I hope to see some familiar faces at Indoor AgCon as I get ready to pack my bags and head out Monday as of this recording. In case you missed last episode, I spoke to Rick Langille for round 2 on the podcast. He's the CEO of Harvest Today, and he shared exciting updates on their vertical farming technology and expansion plans. His passion for innovation and commitment to making vertical farming more accessible shines as we discussed the evolution of his harvest wall system and all the advancements they've been making. I'll be happy to see and connect with Rick at Indoor AgCon as well. This week, I have the pleasure of speaking to Mat Halter. He's the founder of Terrafirm, a company that's pioneering a groundbreaking approach to carbon dioxide enrichment. Mat shares his journey from plant biotechnology researcher to entrepreneur, detailing how he developed a system to capture CO2 from brewery fermentation. That's a hard word, brewery, for use in indoor ag. We dive into the challenges of starting a business in a new industry, including the importance of building a strong team and navigating the complexities of fundraising, something that I'm a little too familiar with. Matt's story is a testament to the power of persistence and innovation in the face of uncertainty, and his insights into the potential environmental and economic benefits of this tech are truly inspiring. If you're interested in the intersection of sustainability, ag, and entrepreneurship, then this episode is definitely for you. I love highlighting 5 takeaways, and I want you to listen for them in this episode, and I think they're really important ones. Number 1 is validate your ideas through testing and data collection. Matt conducted experiments comparing CO2 enriched and controlled growth chambers and gathered qualitative data to prove his concept's effectiveness before seeking funding or partnerships. 2, protect your intellectual property early. Matt filed for a patent before commercialization, which gave him a foundation to build his business on and potential protection from competitors. 3, seek complementary partnerships to strengthen your business model. Matt is actively looking for brewery partners to provide CO2 for his vertical farming system, creating a mutually beneficial relationship. 4, build a diverse team to fill knowledge gaps. As a technical founder, Matt recognizes the need to bring in team members with expertise in areas like produce marketing, sales, and indoor farm operations. And 5, leverage industry events and networks to gain visibility and connections. He plans to attend conferences like Indoor AgCon to meet potential partners, learn from industry experts, and raise awareness of this innovative concept. I'm looking forward to connect with Matt as well. If you're enjoying this episode, I want to ask you, please share this episode with a friend. It's one of the best ways to grow the show. And if you've enjoyed this episode or any of our past episodes, please go ahead and click the subscribe link so we can grow the viewership on this channel as well. You can always visit verticalfarmingpodcast.com to read the full show notes for each episode, which includes summaries, timestamps, guest notes, guest resources, and all guest links as well. Enjoy my conversation with Matt. So Mat Halter, founder of Terrafirm, thank you so much for joining me on Podcast Junkies.
Yeah, thanks, Harry. I appreciate you having me.
Where's home for you?
I'm in San Diego, just outside San Diego technically, but I tend to just say San Diego because nobody knows where San Marcos is. So I'm in San Marcos, California. It's like 45 minutes outside San Diego.
Born and raised?
No, I'm originally from Tennessee. So I was born in North Carolina, but moved to Tennessee at a very early age and spent, the first 34 years of my life there.
Is there anything close to what you thought you might be when someone asked you what you're going to be when you grow up? Resemble what it looks like now?
No. Very far from it. Even if you asked me 10 years ago, I've taken a very weird path, and I had no way of seeing this coming.
So walk us through, no need to go through the entire CV, but walk us through those early days, and then we'll make our way to present day.
Sure. Yeah. So, like I said, grew up in East Tennessee, and I went to college there at a medium-sized regional school in East Tennessee, and after that, went to grad school at University of Tennessee in Knoxville. I was pursuing plant science, plant biotechnology within a plant science department there. So I was working in biofuels at the time. This was like 2009, 2010, and I don't think anybody saw like the Teslas of the world coming at that time. So like the next big vehicle fuel, in theory, the government was really putting all their money on like E85 ethanol-based fuels. So they were dumping a bunch of money into research for that. All throughout the chain, upstream and downstream. They were working on developing ethanol feedstocks. Right now, there's a bunch of ethanol that's produced mostly from corn, though. They wanted to transition away from corn if you're making, tons of fuel. You don't want to be dipping into a food crop for that. So you're looking at alternatives, and I was working on switchgrass, just like a native, big grass you might see growing on the side of the road if you're driving through the South or the Midwest. And we were working on a wide variety of problems associated with it from a biofuel perspective. Digestibility of the sugars in the cell walls was a big one. I was working on photosynthetic improvement. So I was working on creating a grass that grows more efficiently in the cold, photosynthesizes more efficiently in the cold, and see if you can extend the growing season earlier in the spring and later in the fall. So I wrapped that up in 2014 or so, somewhere around then. And I kind of took a big career turn. Traditionally my normal path would have been into big plant biotech, the Monsantos of the world, working on crop development and crop improvement. Kind of was burned out in plant biotech at the time and saw an opportunity locally in a industrial fermentation space. A commercialized company there was working on producing commodity chemicals, basically plastic monomers, essentially from corn rather than from petroleum. They had a microorganism that would, eat corn sugar, produce these monomer chemicals that could go on to be used to make fibers of all different sorts. So I was brought on for strain development and process development, process improvement in that space. And so I was there for about 6 years and kind of became an engineer through training. So got into industrial fermentation through that avenue and brought out to San Diego eventually for a new opportunity out here, again in fermentation, process development. I've had a couple roles here since we've come out. We came out, like I said, in 2020, summer of 2020, COVID was raging, and I've been in a couple roles in fermentation and cell culture process development since then.
Where did the initial interest for plant science start?
That's a good question. I mean, so I grew up on a farm
Okay.
in Tennessee. My dad he grew up on a farm in South Dakota. When the family was moved to Tennessee, he bought a small farm. It wasn't really, we weren't personally doing a lot of industrial agriculture on the farm, but we were basically renting out land space for like cattle and stuff. But we had a big personal garden. And, when you're a kid, a large garden is a farm essentially. And so I grew up working in the garden, and just from a very young age, I was super fascinated with agriculture and plants in general. And that's what led me into like pursuing the graduate degree that I did in plant science, plant biotech, agriculture. So yeah, from a very early age, just fascinated with plants.
And obviously, if you take it all the way to present day, do you think folks are starting to become more aware of where their food comes from? I mean, naturally, if you grow up on a farm, you get that firsthand experience with it. We're on like a slightly bigger plot of land than I'm used to because I grew up in the city and now I'm in Minnesota. So we tried our first pass at the garden last year, and it's just fascinating to see stuff that you literally plant as a tiny seed. And then you've got these like potatoes, and we even tried corn, but it just changes like your perception. If you just grew up in the city, you just used to go into the supermarket and just assuming that's where food comes from.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, especially in the last couple decades in particular, I mean, I guess you could go back to like the internet, right? And that's when people really were able to take a deep dive into stuff like this. But more recently, I mean, when COVID hit, for instance, like everybody started gardening, right? Everybody started growing their own food. Of course, people were doing it before then, and to a certain degree, it really exploded at that point, in particular. And I don't know, it's also fun. Like people are taking interest in where their food comes from, and that's important. That's a big deal. But it's also, a hobby. It's also a lot of fun. What brought me to it in the first place. It wasn't necessarily I don't garden strictly because I want to know where my food is from. I garden because, I love seeing things grow. Yeah. And I think a lot of people probably relate to that same
Yeah, for
perspective.
sure. And there's also something to be said about the work ethic of growing up on a farm because I've heard that consistently from some of the guests that have had that experience as well.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I can't say that I was exactly like, pushing a plow at sunrise. That certainly wasn't my experience, but it was an exciting childhood. I will say that. It was a lot of fun.
So talk to me about what you knew or understood about the indoor farming space and around the time that you were working in fermentation.
Sure. Yeah. So I didn't know a lot, to be honest. So like I said, my graduate work was in switchgrass, improvement. Switchgrass is, not a crop. It's like corn. It's not a crop you can grow under glass, right? So if switchgrass were to have, in theory, made it um, as this big biofuel feedstock, it would be grown, on farmland, much like corn. But when you're working on it as, a research and development subject, you're growing that in a greenhouse. You're not growing it out in the field. You eventually, hopefully, get to the field, but when you're working on it in a lab, everything's in a greenhouse or in a growth chamber or something like that. So I had experience working in greenhouses. I was in a greenhouse every day for 4 years. I wasn't necessarily managing or operating that greenhouse, but I was working in it. That immediately gives me a certain degree, at least, of know-how of the space. But as far as like, industrial agriculture indoors, really zero. I knew of it adjacently, but as far as experience or expertise, very little. When I started, and as I mentioned, my work in grad school was on photosynthesis, right? So I was working on improving cold temperature photosynthesis. So I immediately became, intimately aware of the mechanisms underlying, plant growth, photosynthesis in general, carbon capture. And so while switchgrass was never going to be grown indoors, I was aware of the strategies that indoor growers use to improve photosynthesis, carbon dioxide enrichment in particular. I understood how that mechanism worked. And so when I transitioned to fermentation, I was working at a very large scale industrial plant. Like I said, they had a commercialized process that they were using while we were also working on a smaller scale to improve that process, work on strategies for that could scale to the manufacturing scale. We were letting off a lot of carbon dioxide. It was, hundreds of thousands of liters of fermentation material emitting carbon dioxide at basically nonstop 24/7, 365. And that's, it was probably about a year in that it kind of clicked on me like, wow, that's a huge waste
Yeah.
for something that could be reused for extremely unrelated industry, but could be tapped
Yeah.
into. That was the initial ideation.
Let's get into like your thought process and share like the origin story and how you came up with the concept for Terrafirm.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, like I said, I was thinking on it at work basically, and I figured, oh wow, that could work. That's a cool idea. And just on my free time, I started. My initial thought was, obviously somebody's doing this. This is too obvious. It has to have been done or is being done. And so, started digging on the internet as thoroughly as possible, trying to find who is doing this where, and I couldn't find anything. So I was a little bit blown away by that. So at that point, I thought, okay, well, here, this looks like an opportunity. Started doing some design work on what I thought the system would look like. Started talking to some IP lawyers and stuff, and bouncing ideas off them. What's the feasibility of getting IP like this? Can you even do this? Because, the system in the patent as it stands, there's nothing really new there. It's not, I didn't invent like a new technology. It's a bunch of stuff that exists all over the place that is just put into a unique, sequence. So I didn't know that it would be, I didn't know it would be patentable. I didn't think that it would be until, bouncing several design ideas off of a lawyer and them saying, yeah, this has a chance. And so filed like and this was before forming the company or anything
Yeah.
like that. I wasn't planning on pursuing the company if I didn't get any IP behind it. And so in 2018 or so, filed a provisional, followed up by a full application, and then just basically sat on my hands. Like COVID hit. I mean, there was a point in Tennessee where I had partnered up with a restaurateur in Knoxville who was hoping to open up a new restaurant and brewery. And he thought the idea was cool. And we started working on a business plan to open up this restaurant and brewery. And, I would operate a greenhouse adjacent to it. And it would basically be what TerraFirm looks like now, just a
Sure.
singular,
Yeah.
restaurant brewery. And, we had a few meetings with folks who could bankroll it, and that we didn't end up getting anywhere with them. And then, like, literally, like a couple months after our last meeting, COVID hit, and we were like, wow, we dodged a massive bullet there. Thank goodness we were not successful, because we would have been put out of business. We would have opened our doors the day the world shut down. That was a bit of a blessing in disguise, I guess. And so again,
Mm.
at that time, got the job opportunity out west, moved out here, and again, just sitting on my hands waiting to find out about this patent. I think like the patent lawyer was like, I don't even know. the patent lawyer was like, you definitely have a good shot, but I can't say, like, there's sometimes when I help people with an application, I'm like, oh yeah, this is a slam dunk. Like, there's no way this gets denied. And with mine, he was like, we'll see. And so,
So a question there,
I didn't
Matt.
want to do anything.
Yeah, just a question there. Did you have experience, or did you know of people that had experience successfully filing for patents? Because it's normally not something, I think entrepreneurs, when they get started, there's sometimes so much in go, go, go mode that they just want to get the idea concept validated and they want to try to go to market as fast as possible. So it's interesting that you started with the patent process. And I'm curious if you've had some experience with that.
Yeah, so I can't say that. I wish I could say that there was like a meaningful strategy behind that. That I purposely decided to do it in that order. I can't say that's the case. I knew very little about strategic business decisions at that time, and I was really just doing what I thought naturally was the next step, and that happened to be filing for that patent before pursuing anything else. I didn't think that it was, if it wasn't protectable, then I didn't think that I had the machine behind me to do anything with it. If somebody could just turn around and do it themselves. So I thought it was a natural first choice, first step. And so that's just the way it happened. There wasn't any design behind that. But so got out to San Diego and eventually found out that the patent was going to be accepted, which was, very cool. Celebrated that. And then immediately, was kind of hit by like, oh no, now I have to do this thing. And so built a prototype, just like, a couple circuit board. I didn't build it personally. A good friend of mine who's an electrical engineer who knows how to do these things built it for me. But built a prototype capable of controlling a three-way valve. Basically, it was just like a little CO2 sensor. You can enter in a set point, and when CO2 concentrations are above that set point, it tells the valve one thing. When they're below that set point, it tells the valve another thing. And so I wanted to demonstrate it because this gets back to what I was originally saying. Why hasn't this been done yet? This again, this question keeps like popping up in my mind. Like this seems so obvious. Yeah. And even if you go into the scientific literature on carbon dioxide enrichment, you'll find reviews online, multiple reviews online that list out all these different strategies for doing it. Comparing and contrasting them. And fermentation off gas is mentioned in a couple of them. And so, of course, I dug into those deeply to see where they led. And they didn't lead anywhere. They didn't cite anybody who was doing it. They just said, this is a cool resource. This would be a good spot to get your CO2. They didn't actually cite anybody actually doing it. So I have this question sitting in the back of my head. Why isn't anybody doing this? Maybe there's something I'm not aware of, that maybe there's a major reason nobody's doing this. When you're tapping into, like, I don't know if you homebrew or if anybody listening homebrews, but if you do, you might be familiar with the smell of your garage when you walk into like an active fermentation, right? It smells like hops, it smells like beer, which would imply that it's not just carbon dioxide coming off that fermentation, right? There's a lot of other stuff in there. Plant metabolites are coming off that fermentation. That was a big thought. Like maybe this is why. Maybe if you can't scrub that gas well enough, remove everything of all these VOCs, maybe they mess with the plants somehow. Just one of many big questions that I wanted to address before pursuing it further. Like, okay, so now the IP is wrapped up. Now the next stage is just demonstrate it, see if it works. So that was about a couple years ago now that I started to pursue building out the prototype and bought a couple growth chambers, just like off-the-shelf growth chambers, and we used one as a control, just didn't do anything to it, and used the other one as the treatment. Piped in a fermentation system and did a bunch of home brewing for like 2 months in a row. Every 4 days, made a batch of like a 1 gallon batch of beer, the exact same batch of beer.
Did you have experience in home brewing?
Yeah, I mean, I dabbled for a long time. Like, okay. I started home brewing, when I was younger, and I since stopped. Just because it was a lot of fun when I was 23, right? But it's a big mess now. So I had a lot of experience home brewing, but I had not done it for quite a while when I started this project. But it was nice to get back into that as well. But dumped a lot of beer. So if I'm brewing a gallon once every 4 days, I can't keep up with that. I was dumping
a lot. I was going to ask if you were drinking, you having a lot of beer parties, or
no. It was for the experiment. Dumped a lot of
science.
Yeah. And so yeah, the first test I did was in spinach. I chose spinach because obviously it's a common table vegetable, leafy green, and It's a common product in the vertical farming space, and most importantly, it's easy to grow and small. Like the chambers I bought were not these large industrial chambers you might see at like an R&D facility. They're chambers you're meant to grow things at home with. So spinach was just easy and practical to work with. So ran the trials on spinach. After like 10 days, it was evident that there was a massive effect. Like I could see the treatment chamber running away from the control chamber, which is
Mm,
cool to see.
yeah. Yeah.
Um, but after 50 days, it was stark, and the data analysis I think shows that. I published the results of the trial recently, just about exactly a month ago now. So those are available in a peer-reviewed journal online, and the data is fantastic. It looked great. We got an 89% increase in yield across treatment and control chamber, and
Wow.
any you know any yield improvement program is going to be looking for single digit yield improvement, right? And so to get into the 89 realm, and even if you look at the published data on carbon dioxide enrichment, like there's a lot of academic and industrial data that's available online for spinach specifically. I haven't seen anything that high before. So that was great. It was good to see it. And it kind of boosted my efforts in really ramping things up to get this commercialized and get it out there.
So you're at that point where you see that stark improvement versus the test. How do you think about deciding where you go from there? Because it's obviously, it's proving, what you wanted to prove, your hypothesis. And I'm just curious now, you're wearing so many hats because you've got on your researcher hat, but you've also got on your entrepreneur hat, and you're trying to figure out like what's the appropriate next step. So just walk me through that thought process.
Yeah, that's a tough question because, again, at this point, I'm a first time founder. I had never founded a business before. So I had been and still am learning everything, doing everything for the first time. So this kind of gets back to your question earlier about, why did I decide to go after the patent first instead of doing something else first? And it's like, well, that was just the first thing I thought of. So I'm learning a lot of things, and certainly about founding a business, a lot of things I would have done differently. Like if you had asked me this question 2 years ago, there's a lot of things I've done since then that I would have done differently. And I'm sure if you ask me that question 2 years from now, I will say the same thing. Like, yeah, I wish right after that podcast, I wish I had done this completely differently.
Yeah.
But learning a lot of things the hard way, it's fine. It slows the process down, but ultimately, you do get it done.
And so take us into like present day, where are you now and how are things developing?
Yeah. So right now, uh, Terrafirm exists on paper right now. I'm a pre-seed company, so what I'm trying to do right now is raise money for a pilot. Um, Actively looking for a brewery partner here in the San Diego area that I'd like to put a modular farm on their space. You know, uh, a module like a freight farm style farm on their in the back lot behind their building or on in a
Yeah.
side parking lot or something, and tap into their fermentation waste gas and do a pilot for a couple years, and basically to just validate that there's a market for this, but also to show the entire success of this business model in general relies heavily on partnerships with breweries, right? So carbon dioxide isn't new. Every vertical farm out
Yeah.
there, I would imagine, is doing it. So the advantage that our business has is, the elimination of overhead. It's not a huge overhead associated with carbon dioxide enrichment. I'm not gonna, not gonna claim that it is, but certainly those who are, let's say, using bottled carbon dioxide, they have a big tank on the side of their building and they're pumping it in whenever they need to be.
Yeah.
Certainly, they're implementing strategies to optimize that system. They're using it during peak hours. They're using it sparingly. They're using it for a handful of hours per day. Um, because with indoor farming, temperature control HVAC systems, like, that air is circulating constantly. So if you're going to maintain a certain level, you're going to be pumping in a lot of carbon dioxide. So it would be a good strategy to optimize your usage, right? Use it when you best need it, when you can maximize its effect. Um, so the advantage we have is, in theory, a never-ending supply. So we can use carbon dioxide enrichment at whatever set point we want, high, low, medium, whatever. We can take it as high as, metabolically the plants will allow, which again might be a limiting factor for those who are paying for it. We can take it as high as we want, whenever we want, for as long as we want. And But in order to do so, we're going to need breweries who are willing to partner with us. And that's really where the big risk factor for this business model is getting these people to allow us to partner with them. So the way I envision the pilot working is, going after funding for a 2-year runway that allows me to drop a modular farm on a space and get, obviously move crops to market, but more importantly, measure the effect that we're having on the brewery's marketability. A big pitch we'll be making to breweries is, there's a bunch of survey data out there, a bunch of published data that you can easily find with a Google, that says that beer drinkers, beer consumers are willing to pay a premium for a sustainable product. So if you're able to tell your regulars, your customers that you're actively doing something to cut your carbon footprint, your CO2, rather than being emitted to the air, is actually going towards something tangible that you can literally taste while you're there. Are they going to spend more money? Are they going to come back more? So a big metric to be measured for that pilot is the impact on the brewery, not just the impact on crops. Obviously, that will be measured closely as well. But the pilot will be used to, most importantly, measure our marketability to other partners. And then ultimately, that'll lead to the ability to pursue further funding for expansion. Probably early on, probably more in the modular area, but ultimately, we'd like to find a more established partner that we can develop with or develop next to in a non-modular fashion.
Yeah, there's so many variables I guess you'd want to measure, especially like if you got to the point where you can see different results with different crops.
Yeah, for sure. So the paper that's out
Okay.
right now it just focuses on the spinach results that I had. I've done it with a number of different crops, and I've gotten good results with all of them, but a wide variety of results with all of them, and that can be expected, right? I
Yeah.
use the same set point, for instance. That's something I haven't varied. All crops don't work best at the same set points. That's very well known and established. So that's a variable that I haven't tweaked right there, but certainly for uh, there's a lot of work to do to optimize the system. And I would love to do that work, but right now I'm just pitching, getting it out there.
Yeah, and it obviously comes, as you alluded to, it comes with its own set of challenges because there's all the technology involved in capturing the fermentation and then getting it to have success in the farm itself. But then, you get to that point where you do have your crops and now you've got to get into the marketing and
Yeah.
you've got to figure out, how you're going to actually sell what you're growing. So in terms of all the other challenges normal farms have, it's like you definitely have this extra layer.
Yeah, that kind of gets back to another question you asked earlier, regarding my experience in the vertical or indoor growing space. And my answer was not a lot, right? So another important thing I'm pursuing right now is building out a team that can help me do that. So I'm definitely hoping to, when it comes time to start approaching VCs or approaching early funding sources, whatever it may look like, um, I'm hoping to have a team with me that can tackle, or not just tackle because it'll be a team effort, but that can bring experience in produce marketing and sales as well as indoor farm operations to the table. That's another huge task that I'm taking care of right now.
Yeah, and I imagine there's a lot of things that you're thinking about. One of the questions I like to ask, and this is for folks that have, established farmers have been doing this for a while, but I'm curious your answer might be different. What's a tough question you've had to ask yourself recently?
Yeah, sure. A lot of them. I mean, no, I think the toughest question I've had to ask myself recently is, what am I missing? And I kind of touched on that earlier, but I don't necessarily mean it just from a technical standpoint. I talked earlier about my thoughts about why haven't people done this yet. So there is that, but also what am I missing from the business perspective? Again, I am a first-time founder. I'm a first-time, this is the first business I've started. What don't I know that I don't know what I don't know. So it's a constant battle to learn more about strategies for starting a business, for seeking funding. What are investors looking for? This is a world that I have really no official training in, so I'm learning all this on the side, and it's been a big learning experience. I've got a friend here in San Diego who is He's been involved with a couple successful VC-backed startups, totally different industry, but essentially the same at the backbone. And I was talking with him sometime last year about my pitch deck and just tapping him as a resource for how can I do this better? What am I doing wrong? And we were going through my pitch deck actually, and I was going through slide for slide, and I wasn't necessarily giving him like the straight up pitch, but I was giving him the gist of what each slide is meant to communicate and what I'm going to be saying, and so on and so forth. And I got to a particularly business heavy slide that I had put together that it became clear, it became clear that I was like, I pumped the brakes when I started talking about this one, and I was a
Yeah.
little bit self-conscious, and I kind of, it was clear I wasn't speaking confidently, and I noticed that, and I kind of stopped, and I was like, okay, I got to be honest, like, I'm a super technical guy. I don't know a lot about this one. I did my best to put the slide together, but I need to know this. I'm a technical person, not a business guy. And he stopped me abruptly and said, "You need to never say that again. Let me
Mm,
stop you right there." He said something along the lines of, if you come to me and ask for a ridiculous amount of money and then say, but I
yeah.
don't really know what I'm going to do with it, I'm not going to write you a check, right? He was like, why
Sure.
would you even consider that? He was like, you need to,
Yeah, it makes sense.
it was obviously I wasn't pitching to him, but he was like, you need to go back and start over and really get to the point where you don't feel in the back of your head, you don't feel like saying, this isn't my expertise when you're doing this. And so that was good. I mean, it was like, he caught me off guard and he gave me a good lesson. But it's probably the best lesson I've gotten in this process to date. And so that kind of spurred me into spending a lot of time, learning the ins and outs of what I'm asking people to give me money for. And that was super helpful. But that continues to be a tough question that I'm asking myself constantly. What am I missing? What am I not doing that I need to be doing? And how can I find that out?
Yeah, it's very interesting because I've been an entrepreneur for 10 years and it's like there's a lot of things that you take for granted when you're working in a corporate job that there's stuff that's just taken care of, like investment and
For
finances and
sure.
payroll and all like marketing and
Yeah.
sales and like
Yeah.
administration and like ordering supplies, like
Running a
all this
website.
stuff. And then like when
Yeah.
you realize that you are yeah. Yeah, when you realize you're the buck stops with you, it's very sobering, but it's empowering as well. And there's been hiccups in my entrepreneurial journey, definitely over the years, and some lessons learned from dealing with the IRS. But it really drives that point home of understanding where you do have gaps and either seeking out mentors or just doubling down and just figuring out like, okay, I gotta hit YouTube or I gotta, figure out where the course is that's gonna get me like the 80% there so I can start to speak intelligently
Yeah.
and
And
all
then
those
that's another
things.
reason why it's so important to build out a fantastic team, right? So that you can trust, because, I know myself well enough to know that, I'm going to be, let's say hypothetically, I land seed funding and I'm able to pilot this thing sometime in, let's say, a year from now. I know that I'm going to be a pain about the ins and outs and the little things with the goings on of the operations. I know that I'm going to be, but I also know that I need to do a lot of other things. And so I need to know that I have somebody that I trust to take care of that so I don't have to stress about it. And so that comes back to how important it is right now to build out the team that I'm looking for, just to take that off the plate, and not have to worry about those things. Because there are so many other things that I have to be worried about.
So how do you think about tackling a problem like that? And I've had this conversation with first-time CEOs as well. Like, where do you look to for guidance? Are there mentors in terms of the thought process for how you start to build a world-class team around you that can support you in the things that are their genius?
Well, I can't say I have any direct mentorship on that topic as of right now. I would love to have some, but my main resource right now is like, I listen to a lot of podcasts on starting companies. This vertical farming podcast, for instance, has been a great resource, many others as well. So I listen to a lot of founders podcasts that touch on a lot of these things. And they're certainly helpful. Everything I hear at this point is helpful. So yeah, I mean, the internet's a great resource, just in general. I don't have any like, any
Yeah.
direct mentorship on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think really the guidance there and some of the feedback that I've heard from past guests is just really they tell you to hire, what is it, like hire slow, fire fast,
I
something
haven't
along
heard
those
that one
lines.
yet, but hopefully not the case, but yeah, I guess that is a good strategy to have in
Yeah.
the back of your mind.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that the point there was really take the time to figure out if you have a shared mission with these folks because, you know,
Yeah, sure.
s-
And, make a change fast if you becomes obvious that's not the
yeah,
case. Yeah.
if it's, yeah, yeah. So have you had much experience or have engaged with the controlled environment industry or the vertical farming world?
Not directly. Beyond, spending countless hours on industry websites and industry podcasts, I am hoping this year to get to a couple conferences. Still trying to work out logistics on that. I've got a 9-month-old, so trying to figure out how to juggle that. But yeah, not directly, but hoping to change that soon. Again, as this things have really ramped up for the business in the last 6 months, let's say. It's been a
Hmm.
very slow trickle leading to that 6 month period. And then in the last 6 months, it's kind of been full tilt. And so that is on my goal list for 2025 is to start, kind of getting my feet into the industry a bit better than I have in the past and getting to know people and getting to know organizations a bit better.
So, given the audience for this show, is there any expertise or connections or potential partners that you're sort of eyeing for this next 12-month cycle?
Yeah, for sure. So I have touched base with freight farms, for instance, just kind of trying to build out an idea of what this pilot's going to look like. I have had conversations with them about, can we engineer your modular farms for this system? And it's a pretty straightforward, just doing some extra plumbing on the system. I have been using them as a resource to kind of build out my strategy for this pilot. Of course, there are many others like them, and many other resources within the industry that may be applicable as well. Right now, my biggest next hurdle is really locking down a brewery partner. I've got an article coming out, like kind of a Q&A style article coming out in a San Diego brewing publication in about a week and a half or 2 weeks that I'm hoping to kind of ride into some partnership discussions with a couple of the local breweries here in town. San Diego is a great place to be for beer. There's, I came from, like I said, I came from East Tennessee. We were in when I was in Knoxville, we were like 2 hours away from Asheville, North Carolina, which is, the East Coast brewing capital of the country, in my opinion. And San
Yeah.
Diego is very much the West Coast. So there's a lot of small to medium range breweries out here, very high density. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to, I'm hoping to make contact with a couple of them and eventually come out with one that really shares, sees the vision that I have for this and wants to come along and is excited by it and thinks that they have a customer base that will appreciate it and enjoy it as well.
You don't often see the pairing of beer and salads. There's probably like a marketing play there where, there's been stranger combinations that have been made and have had success. So I think if you've got the right marketing person that gets pretty creative, I think there's some pretty
Yeah, I
interesting and
mean,
fun things you
so
can
the
do
way
there.
I'm approaching it right now would be, not necessarily to be selling out of the brewery because you just couldn't move enough product with that model. But by all means, like, if I could find a brewery partner that wants to put up a fridge behind the counter, right? And here's your pint and here's your head of lettuce, like that would be awesome. We're hoping to do like a farmer's market style pop up on like Saturday mornings at the brewery, which will bring people to the brewery. There's definitely a dynamic that can be fostered, especially like craft beer drinkers. Um, they tend to be foodies in general, right? So your average like West
Yeah,
Coast
yeah, for sure.
IPA connoisseur is also going to be down for locally grown produce like that. They just go hand in hand. So
Hmm.
hoping to really lean into that dynamic and kind of find resonance in that market.
Well, I appreciate you reaching out, and because it's hard to keep up with everything that's happening in the industry, but it's always exciting to see new innovations. And I think this has definitely got some legs, and you've got your work cut out for you, obviously,
Yeah.
as a first-time entrepreneur and first-time CEO. But I think the path that you took is really interesting to get that patent first and then to start to find the partners that would make sense for this. So it feels like things are moving in the right direction, and sometimes it's hard to look at progress when you look back all the way at like
Yeah.
2017, 18 when you first had this idea, and we're at
Mm.
2025 now. So I think there's something to be said for tenacity and persistence.
Yeah, it's been a long and slow road. Like a lot of that time was literally just waiting to see if things were going to happen. It's been a long time coming. And so I'm excited that it's, like I said, the last 6 months have really been busy. And I feel like there's a lot of momentum right now. For the first time since I started, it was always very much like a weird idea that maybe I could pursue up until like August when things really started moving. Now it's like, okay, this is a business. This is something that I can actually make happen. So I'm hoping to ride that momentum for sure.
Yeah, and I think the more you start to speak to folks in the industry, and getting to events like Indoor AgCon, which I'll be at in March as well. I think it's like a third or fourth time there. But I think getting some visibility into the dynamics around operating and running a farm in itself, and then because that's,
Yeah.
50% of the
Hmm.
business model. So I think the more you start to talk about folks, and I'll just kind of like now that you've got the patent filed, you can start to kind of pick people's brains about the idea, and I think being in the environment, I think will start to help and probably foster some other ideas for possible collaborations.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So it's Terra Terra dash firm ferm.com. Anywhere else you want to send folks want to learn more?
You'll find everything on that website. It links us to the socials. There's a press release on there that links to the peer-reviewed article that's out that shows the data set we talked about earlier and really lays out in fine detail the process flow diagram and how everything works. The website should do it. Yeah, anybody would be able to find anything they want on there.
Okay. Yeah, Matt, we'll make sure that all those links and everything you provided is going to be in the show notes. But I
Cool.
really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story.
Thank you, Harry. I really appreciate the time.